This webinar is first of a two-part webinar series to analyze and expose the ongoing economic and military attacks currently being launched by the imperialist United States against key global regions across the world. Today's webinar is titled U.S. Imperial Aggression and Plunder of Asia and the Pacific. We will focus on U.S. imperialist attacks against the people in Southeast Asia, West Asia, the Pacific, and the United States itself. Please tune in for the second part of this webinar series in 2 weeks, when we will focus on U.S. aggression and plunder across Latin America and Canada. The intensifying U.S. imperialist aggression in Asia and the Pacific is rooted in the overall strategic decline of the U.S. from the previous position as the sole dominant world power and its identification of China as its chief economic competitor and political rival. Shortly after the financial meltdown of 2008, the US ramped up its imperialist rivalry with China and declared its pivot to Asia foreign policy strategy. This is the United States' desperate attempt to counter the economic and military rise of China and secure its access to Asian markets while attempting to reinforce its alliance in the region. In recent years, the US has steadily reinforced the post-Second World War island chain strategy to encircle and contain China with concentric rings of US military bases connected across Asia and the Pacific. In preparation for an all-out armed conflict centered around control of Taiwan and South China Sea. Annual US military exercises in the region have continued to increase in frequency as well as in number of troops participating from different countries, with the aim of increasing the US ability to command the forces of other nations as additional extensions of the US military during wartime. Among the 500 US-Philippine military exercises held this year, the recent 2026 Balikatan exercises held from April to May broke new records with more than 17,000 troops from the US, the Philippines, Japan, France, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The ongoing 2026 Rim of the Pacific, or RIMPAC as it's known, naval exercises, which runs from June 24th to July 31st in and around the Hawaiian Islands, is also the largest ever, with 30,000 personnel from 30 participating nations. This biennial exercise has long been protested by the people of Hawaii and across the Pacific for the destruction of the environment, wildlife, and the increased violations against women that occur with the increased militarization of the islands. The US warmongering and the accompanying military and trade agreements it continues to sign with allied nations intend to ensure US economic control over markets and resources in the Asia-Pacific. The US is desperately seeking to secure alternate supply chains for advanced technologies that are currently controlled by China, such as semiconductors, artificial intelligence, rare earth elements, and critical minerals through initiatives such as Pax Silica, which aim to establish new forms of economic security zones. Connected to this inter-imperialist rivalry is the maritime control over sea lanes and marine resources in the Asia-Pacific. The US opportunistically has taken advantage of territorial conflicts between China and Southeast Asian nations surrounding the South China Sea in order to justify further US military buildup. Meanwhile, as the world reels from the imperialist economic and political crisis instigated by the failed US Zionist war of aggression in Iran, the US commemorates its 250th anniversary today with unprecedented international isolation and growing mass discontent and resistance within the belly of the beast itself. Since returning to office, the current Trump regime has exponentially exacerbated the anti-people policies of the previous Biden regime by intensifying the state's fascist attacks against the people in the US, especially the migrants. So, to hear more about the situation in the US and the growing people's resistance, we welcome the newly elected chairperson of the International League of People Struggles United States Country Chapter, Tino Valen. Tino, the floor is yours. Thank you for agreeing to be here.
Thank you very much, Asra, and for everyone for this webinar. and letting us join. We just came from just last month, a very successful, over 700 people joined our political conference, a peace forum. Our third National Assembly is IOPS US, and mobilization against the AI and tech companies in the US that are funding and are part of the US war machine. So I'm glad to join you all this morning and talk about fascism inside the US, the conditions for migrants and minority groups here, and what are the tools and methods and institutions used to oppress the people and how the people are fighting back. So I'll just start with our brief background on how did we turn to fascism inside the United States. As the crisis of imperialism continues to erode the US from inside, um, it has become increasingly violent and aggressive in an effort to stave off its own decline, as Azra talked about. The Trump 2.0 regime has openly mocked and cast aside any semblance of democracy, and domestically, the US state has
Sorry,
unleashed
Tino,
increasing aggressive
can
attacks
you
on.
can you be a bit slower in your
Okay,
delivery? The interpreters are having a difficult.
sure. Thank you. I'll slow down a bit. Um, so domestically, the US state has increasingly attacked the people, communities, and movements, including the fascist attacks on migrants and workers, and with the deployment of the immigration, customs, and enforcement, and the militarization of major cities. These open attacks by the state are coupled with sweeping attacks on people's livelihood through the One Big Beautiful Bill or Act, and what we as IOPS US call the One Big Bold Attack on the working class. Trump continues to blatantly trample the democratic rights of the people in an effort to consolidate strength and accumulate wealth for the most reactionary faction of the ruling class. In the US economic crisis and the rise of Trump's fascism, the US federal debt has ballooned to over $37 trillion, and it's only grown in Trump's second term. Despite this massive debt crisis, he continued to expand the tax cuts for the wealthiest billionaires. And here in the US, we have the first trillionaire. Elon Musk became the first trillionaire, and they pay little in taxes. Uh, in the meantime, the federal budget now exceeds $7.3 trillion, so the debt will only grow. And this includes the Department of War budget, which will increase to $1.5 trillion this year, the most ever. But this burden of the massive debt is pushed onto the backs of US workers. Trump is starving the people of much needed programs and services, cutting government health care, food programs, and laying off tens of thousands of government employees. Americans are deep in debt with stagnant wages, high interest loans, and no relief in sight from inflation and increased privatization of services. So the decades of failure of the neoliberal and neoconservative rule of both the Democrats and the Republican parties, the bourgeoisie, have failed to meet the needs of the people or address the political and economic crisis of US imperialism. And this has led to the open fascism by Trump as the most reactionary, most chauvinistic, and most imperialist elements of finance capital, the Trump regime. Trump returned to power in 2024, waging a xenophobic, racist campaign against minorities, but particularly dehumanizing and scapegoating migrants for the failures of the US economy and for American workers' poverty and misery. He posed himself as the only leader capable of saving the country to quote unquote make America great again. Um, uh, the US economic crisis was also pushed onto the global south as Trump waged economic wars on the world through tariffs, which ended up being mostly just a tax on the American consumers. Um, we were reminded when we shared some of this information in Nepal at the EMA Global Assembly and the Global Workers Study Conference that a lot of these conditions we are facing in the US under Trump's fascist regime have been plaguing our homelands and our peoples for decades, but the rise of fascism in the US under Trump is a relatively newer development after decades of failed neoliberal and economic policies and neoconservative wars. So under Trump, as the US imperialism further declines, he's unleashed fascist, neoliberal, and neoconservative attacks on the people. The One Big Beautiful Act, his budget strips funding from people's services, funneling it into the pockets of monopoly capitalists and the repressive arms of the state, and also paid to the largest war profiteers, tech and AI and military companies, which we'll discuss later. But never before have the contradictions of imperialism been so stark. I next want to talk about some of the conditions for migrants and minority groups. Trump's racist criminalization of migrants, he called them gang members, rapists, murderers, and drug dealers, criminals and he scapegoated migrants for the economic and social problems in US society. He has promised the largest mass deportation program in history, and the budget that he proposed has proposed $170 billion through 2029 for immigration enforcement expansion. He has promised $45 billion for detention center expansion, hoping to more than double the capacity and imprison over 100,000 migrants in for-profit detention centers. He has also promised $30 billion to hire more ICE enforcement personnel, the immigration enforcement personnel, and over $60 billion for border walls and border enforcement. Right now in the US, there are more than 70,000 migrants in detention under horrific conditions. They have barely any food. The food is terrible. It's uncooked. It's inedible. You cannot eat it. The water is undrinkable. They're eating off of the ground sometimes. They're exposed when they're using the bathroom and taking showers. They're physically and sexually abused, and some have even died in prison. We have the highest number of detained migrants in history, with the detention centers filled beyond capacity. There are really horrific conditions in places like Alligator Alcatraz in Florida. In Guantanamo Bay, they have detained migrants from Venezuela, and in military sites like Fort Bliss, the Dilley Detention Center of children detained in the hundreds in Texas. And then, of course, we've heard the stories of the mega prison in El Salvador, the CICOT Detention Center. The massive ICE raids and sweeps of workplaces, communities, shopping centers, they've targeted to arrest over 3,000 migrants every day back in June last year. And right now, over 200 US citizens have even been arrested and some even deported. By mid-year this year in 2026, Trump is claiming to have deported over 500,000 or more than 500,000 migrants. And families and loved ones have been torn apart from their children and families, and maybe the only home they know, having grown up here in the United States. They're openly attacking migrants, regardless of status, and using Supreme Court decisions that are allowing racial discrimination, using race as a way to target migrants, and sowing fear and terrorizing communities, driving migrants into hiding. They're losing their livelihood. They're afraid to go to school, to the hospital, and access other needed programs and services because of the fear of arrest, detention, and deportation. The fascist attacks are everywhere. They're using electronic surveillance and artificial intelligence to track and target migrants. They're deploying National Guard and military troops to US cities throughout all of last year, and they're demonizing Venezuelan and other migrants as drug dealers, calling them narco-terrorists to justify the bombings of fishing boats in the Caribbean and the invasion of Venezuela at the beginning of this year. There's growing numbers of unaccompanied children who are being targeted as well. We've heard of children being targeted for arrest and detention and putting into child labor into factories and having to defend themselves in court with no adults or no legal support. The crisis is also hitting workers the hardest. Inflation is through the roof right now, and we can't even afford to pay for the products that the workers are making. That's even if workers have a job. There have been attacks on the reproductive rights of women and of families. They're cutting back on access to abortion. They've relegated from the federal government to the states. They've cut funding. They've closed health clinics so that it's more difficult for community members to access reproductive care, and whole clinics are being shut down. They've attacked the LGBTQ community. Their rights and diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are shut down in schools, in the military under the Department of War, and in government offices, parks, and facilities. There's a rise of Christian right-wing social policies that are sweeping across the country. And lastly, there are new attacks on the voting rights, requiring identification, birth certificates, citizenship documents. They are redistricting voting districts to redraw electoral maps so that Black communities and people of color communities can't have a majority and vote and elect their own representatives. They're using various tools, methods, and institutions to oppress the people. We talked about Project 2025. This was a right-wing Christian nationalist blueprint on how to remake the federal government, how to weaken the US government overall and build an authoritarian presidency with devastating consequences for workers, the environment, public health, and the rights of millions of Americans. They've already accomplished more than half of Project 2025 in the first year and a half of Trump's second term. They're eliminating programs for diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are weaponizing the FBI and the Department of Justice, which are supposed to be impartial government agencies, into politically motivated federal law enforcement agencies that target and prosecute Trump's political enemies and his opposition. They're dismantling the Department of Education and science-based institutions like the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, which tracks things like climate change, or even the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. They're attacking government agencies like these, and they've made progress on all these fronts, stripping the bureaucracy and pushing back on government institutions and structures which can limit his fascist program. They've built out the repressive state machinery, including the Department of Homeland Security, expanded the use of artificial intelligence, surveillance technologies, and the Department of War. And they've attacked due process, claiming illegal invasion of Venezuelan gang members, or migrants are killing American citizens, so we don't even have to prove their guilt in crime. They're just, even if they're just accused of the crime, they can be deported. They're deporting migrants to third countries like El Salvador and Sudan and Eswatini in Africa. And they're using immigration enforcement to target political repression against people who are supporting Palestine, like Mahmoud Khalil, Rumesa Öztürk, and others. They're attacking radical woke activists, national liberation organizations, genuine worker organizations, and others who are fighting against ICE, AI, and tech. They're terror tagging them and calling them communists, Marxists, red tagging them for arrest and deportation. The conditions are dire, but people are fighting back. I'm summarizing some of what Nima and Rhonda from ILPS have shared at our third National Assembly. We've waged campaigns to defend people's struggle against wrongful arrest and trumped-up charges. We're countering domestic terrorism framework of the U.S. that's used to target communities and activists. We're fighting alongside students and workers facing campus repression when they're voicing out their opposition to the wars on Palestine and in West Asia. We're fighting back against the fascist repression, including taking up fights to release migrants from detention in these for-profit detention centers and getting ICE, our immigration and customs enforcement, out of our workplaces, schools, and communities. We fought back against the ICE and U.S. government murders of Renee Good, Silverio Villegas, Keith Porter, and Alex Preddy, and the accompanying National Guard deployed across our cities, We've won concrete victories to kick the National Guard out of our cities and released over 10 migrants from detention through our joint campaign work, including Jonah, a Filipino migrant green card holder, Tom, a Vietnamese refugee in Southern California, and most recently, Las Madres Unidas en la Lucha, a collective of Central American mothers released and returned to their families based in Baltimore. Our People Over Profit campaigns have supported workers impacted by OBA, including Starbucks workers and others, Kaiser workers who are fighting against CEOs, prioritizing profit over patients and nurses' needs. There have been massive protests in the streets to confront Trump's wars mongering and wars of aggression in Palestine, Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, and across the Asia Pacific. We've been waging those campaigns to get the U.S. out of our homelands, to oppose U.S.-led war and plunder, to get U.S. out of Korea, U.S. out of the Philippines, U.S. out of Puerto Rico, and campaigns in solidarity with Myanmar and Palestine. We've been fighting all of these campaigns and joining the global calls to free all migrants and for all workers to unite. Today, on July 4th, we've called to fight 250 years of U.S. plunder, war, and terror. We celebrate 250 years of resistance to U.S. War and plunder. And we call on the people to fight 250 years of exploitation, plunder, and terror, to fight U.S. greed and terror and get the U.S. out of everywhere, and to celebrate 250 years of people's resistance. I'll paste into the chat some of the calls and demands that we've made, and a link to our campaign calls for tomorrow for people to mobilize across the country. We're excited to share those with you and to fight alongside you in this struggle against U.S. imperialism and war across the Asia Pacific, and look forward to the sharings of the other speakers. Thank you for letting us share what's happening here in the U.S. We look forward to building our solidarity from here in the belly of the beast across the Asia Pacific and throughout the world. Thank you.
In particular, yeah, just to highlight what Tino just said, of course, the fascism within the United States is getting worse within the belly of the beast, particularly due to the imperialist crisis that's causing it in particular to act out against in the Asia and the Pacific. And to speak more about the military buildup in particularly Southeast Asia, we want to welcome on the floor the newly selected Secretary General of ILPS Philippines, Arnold Padilla. Arnold, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ritik. Incidentally, today is the Filipino-American Friendship Day. No, on this day, 80 years ago, the U.S. supposedly formally recognized the independence of the Philippines. Obviously, we know that that is a lie. That's why, while we are friends, while the Filipino people are friends, no, with the American people, who, no, as Tino just shared, are similarly oppressed and exploited by imperialism. We are never friends, no, with U.S. imperialism. And just this morning, we had a protest action near the U.S. Embassy in Manila on issues that I'm going to talk about today. For my input, I would like to focus on how we should understand the dramatic expansion of U.S. military and economic intervention across East and Southeast Asia, particularly in the Philippines. Because some observers, no, they tend to treat recent developments, no, like the massive expansion of U.S. military bases in the region, the intensification of tensions in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, the establishment of new economic corridors, the rush for critical minerals, and the growing presence of American troops and deepening U.S. military intervention as separate developments or issues. In reality, they are not. They are interconnected components of a single imperialist strategy today. And to understand what is happening, we need to examine the larger geopolitical picture. We need to understand why and how US imperialism is shifting its focus from unbridled neoliberal globalization before to strategic competition today. For nearly 4 decades after the Cold War, US imperialism maintained its global dominance primarily through neoliberal globalization. It promoted free trade, investment liberalization, privatization, deregulation, and financial globalization. Uh, this allowed American monopoly capital to relocate production to countries with cheap labor while maintaining control over finance, technology, and military power. The objective was straightforward: maximize profits while preserving American global hegemony. But ironically, this strategy produced an unexpected consequence. China became the world's manufacturing center. While the US increasingly relied on finance, software, military industries, China steadily built its industrial capacity, technological capabilities, and infrastructure. Today, China dominates the manufacturing of many strategic products, from electronics and batteries to solar panels and telecommunications equipment. It has become indispensable to global supply chains. And this represents the most significant challenge to US imperialist dominance since the end of the Cold War. And Washington apparently acknowledges that unrestricted globalization strengthened its principal strategic competitor today. So consequently, the US has fundamentally recalibrated its strategy. Instead of unrestricted globalization, it now prioritizes economic security by promoting what it calls ally shoring, and now actively intervenes to secure strategic industries and has been more aggressive in using industrial policy. And the objective for US imperialism is clear: control the industries that determine military superiority in the 21st century. And these include industries like semiconductors, artificial intelligence, advanced computing, telecoms, clean energy technologies, and above all, critical minerals that make all these
Sorry,
industries possible.
Arnold, if I may interrupt, please speak a bit more slowly. And this is for all speakers to come. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Andra. So under this recalibrated US imperialist strategy, East and Southeast Asia have become even more strategic for US imperialism. The region has become the epicenter of the strategic competition between the US and China. The region contains several of the world's most important maritime trade routes. It is home to advanced manufacturing centers. It contains enormous reserves of critical minerals. It hosts many of the world's largest semiconductor production networks. And geographically, it surrounds China. So this explains why the US has systematically strengthened military alliances, further strengthened military alliances with Japan, South Korea, Australia, and of course the Philippines, while deepening security cooperation with Taiwan and expanding partnerships throughout the region. So military alliances are expanding, joint military exercises are becoming larger, advanced missile systems are being deployed, defense budgets continue to rise, military interoperability is being institutionalized, and all these are not simply defensive measures. They form part of a broader strategy to maintain American military supremacy and contain China's rise. Central to this strategy of US imperialism is what American military planners call the First Island Chain. This chain stretches from Japan, to Taiwan, the Philippines, and into Indonesia. And this island arc effectively forms the western defensive perimeter of US power in the Pacific. From Washington's perspective, controlling or maintaining military access to this chain allows the US to monitor Chinese naval movements, project military power throughout the Indo-Pacific, and if conflict erupts, restrict China's access to the wider Pacific Ocean. The Philippines occupies one of the most strategically valuable positions within this first island chain. The US neocolony, the Philippines has become a very crucial forward operating platform for US imperialism. This strategic importance explains why US intervention in the Philippines today has accelerated dramatically under the regime of the current President Marcos Jr. Under the Marcos regime, the US has expanded its military bases. We call them EDCA sites, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, that allows the American forces to establish their military bases here in the country. So right now, there are 9 EDCA sites, U.S. military bases. Before there were 5, and the additional military bases of the U.S. are those facing the South China Sea and Taiwan. Under the current regime, the US has scaled up its military exercises to unprecedented levels. Azra already mentioned this in her intro. And these exercises take place throughout the year and all over the archipelago. The biggest of these exercises, we call them the Balikatan, that mobilized 10,000 American troops this year. It's a record high. US imperialism has also been deploying advanced missile systems, drones, surveillance aircraft, and intelligence sharing mechanisms. Reaper drones, US Reaper drones, are flying over the South China Sea, and they're flying from a US-controlled airbase north of Manila. And for the first time during the Balikatan exercise this year, the US fired a Tomahawk missile, which traveled more than 600 kilometers inside Philippine territory. And they are also establishing new joint command structures. So today we have the Task Force Philippines, which creates a direct operational linkage between the armed forces of the Philippines and the US Pacific Command, or the PACOM. Inside the general headquarters of the Philippine Armed Forces, there is a newly established Joint Command and Control Center designed to enable real-time intelligence sharing, joint planning, and interoperability between the armed forces of the Philippines and the US Pacific Command. At the same time, billions of dollars in US military assistance are pouring in, about $500 million per year, over the next 5 years. So that is about $2.5 billion, a record high. And we are currently next only to Taiwan, in the Asia Pacific in terms of US military assistance. And more US military aid is expected, as the US plans to structurally bundle Taiwan and the Philippines into a single unified defense theater. Just several weeks ago, at the U.S. Senate, they introduced what they call the First Island Chain Security Cooperation Initiative. So this will allow the Philippines to access more military assistance from the US. And this first island chain security cooperation initiative will also accelerate the delivery of arms, not just to Taiwan and the Philippines, but also to Japan and South Korea, no, under the US Foreign Military Sales Scheme. And these are all components, no, of Washington's effort to transform the Philippines into a permanent forward operating platform within its Indo-Pacific strategy. But what is particularly significant today is that the US military and geopolitical agenda has systematically and strategically linked US imperialism's economic initiatives as well. It means that the military strategy and economic strategy have become inseparable, no, under the US overall strategy in the region. US imperialist war and plunder have therefore become even more obvious, blatant, and aggressive. Historically, we know that imperialism has never been simply about military conquest. No? Its ultimate objective is for its financial oligarchs to accumulate capital and profit. It has always been about their economic domination. And military power protects economic interests. Economic expansion finances military power. Today, no, within the context of the intensifying and sharpening contradiction and competition between the US and China, this relationship, no, between economic and military strategy and agenda has become even more integrated. No, infrastructure projects, digital connectivity, energy systems, industrial zones, mining projects, transport corridors, all these, no, that are being funded by US imperialism serve dual purposes. They facilitate, of course, capital accumulation, but at the same time, they also support military logistics. And our case in the Philippines clearly illustrates this integration, such as what we are seeing. No, we have now what we call the Luzon Economic Corridor, a major imperialist project in the Philippines, and of course the Pax Silica, which is also now being implemented in the country. The Luzon Economic Corridor is an initiative of the US together with Japan, and they are promoting it as a development initiative. It's supposed to modernize infrastructure, create jobs, increase investments, improve logistics. But when we examine, no, the geographical location of the Luzon Economic Corridor and the overall strategic design of this project, there emerges another picture. This corridor links the four major economic hubs of the Luzon Island in the Philippines. No? The Subic Economic Hub, no? Clark, Capital Manila, and Batangas. And all these areas are already hosting substantial US military facilities or strategic infrastructure. The project, the Luzon Economic Corridor includes ports, airports, railways, energy facilities, communications networks, data infrastructure, and logistics hubs. These investments undoubtedly have civilian and commercial or industrial functions, but at the same time, they also possess obvious military applications. When you talk about ports, they move not just commercial goods, but also warships. No, railways transport cargo, but they can also transport military equipment. When you talk about fiber optic networks to support businesses, they can also support military communications. They plan to build new fuel pipelines to serve industries, but also these same pipelines can also be for military bases. Therefore, the distinction between civilian and military infrastructure becomes increasingly blurred. The result is infrastructure that simultaneously serves economic integration and military power projection. Pax Silica, no, the latest initiative of U.S. imperialism, intends to secure the supply chains of the 21st century warfare. Unlike earlier imperialist projects, no, that centered on oil, for example, Pax Silica focuses on artificial intelligence, which is the oil of our century, of the new century, and advanced technologies. AI, no, or artificial intelligence, is rapidly becoming the decisive force, no, of the modern economy. And at the same time, it also determines future military capabilities. No, they require semiconductors, and semiconductors require critical minerals. And the Philippines obviously possesses some of the world's largest reserves of nickel, copper, cobalt, and other strategic minerals that the US needs. And these minerals are indispensable for the production of batteries, semiconductors, for industrial uses. But at the same time, missile guidance systems, military electronics, no, and data centers for military purposes are also using the same technology. So this explains the proposed economic security zone, no, the Pax Silica project here in the Philippines. Its purpose is not to simply establish another industrial park. No, it's not. We have many special economic zones, no, but this economic security zone is unique. No, it's the first of its kind, no, that's being planned to establish here in the Philippines. And its function is to integrate Philippine resources into supply chains organized primarily around American strategic interests. So mining, therefore, no, becomes inseparable from geopolitics. Our natural resources are now strategic assets, no, in the context of the US-China competition, and industrial policy becomes military policy. The extraction of Philippine minerals increasingly serves not national industrialization, no, but the technological and military competition, no, of major powers. And the cost of these imperialist projects to our sovereignty is very high. While those who are supporting these supposed economic projects, no, that they will create jobs, modernize our infrastructure, introduce new technology, and promote economic growth, no, the question remains, no, who controls these industries? No, who determines production priorities? Who owns the technology? Who captures the profits? And who bears the environmental costs? No, when you set up an economic security zone, no, a giant center for minerals processing, no, that requires a lot of land. No, the economic security zone will require 1,600 hectares of land. But aside from that, no, this area will only cover the processing of minerals, and they will still need the raw materials. No, so they will set up and encourage more mining areas throughout the Philippines. So we are talking about thousands of additional hectares more outside of the Pax Silica Economic Security Zone. And of course, there's also the question of who assumes the geopolitical risk. Because obviously, this is not a simple economic project. No, it has military strategic significance, no, for the US. So as the US-China tensions intensifies, no, the Philippines therefore becomes increasingly exposed to the dangers of military confrontation, no, because we already have the military bases here in the Philippines of the US. We already have the advanced weapons systems of the Americans deployed in different parts of the country. And now we are setting up infrastructure that is purportedly for industrial and commercial use, but obviously has military purposes as well to support US imperialism's military operations and projections in the Philippines and in the entire region. So the Philippines risks becoming a staging ground, no, in conflicts that fundamentally arise, no, from competition, no, between competing imperialist powers rather than from the interests, no, of the Filipino people. And across the region, across East and Southeast Asia, we observe similar dynamics where military alliances are expanding, defense cooperation agreements are multiplying, strategic infrastructure is increasingly linked, no, to military planning, the acceleration of critical minerals extraction, advanced manufacturing is being reorganized around geopolitical alliances, no, such as the Pax Silica, and imperialist competition, no, is reshaping entire regional economies. And as I've said, the objective is not simply economic, it's not simply trade. No, it is the restructuring of our production, our technology, finance, logistics, and military power into competing geopolitical blocks. And this represents for us a new phase, no, of the imperialist rivalry and an escalation, no, of the oppression and plunder, no, that the people of the Philippines and the people of the region are experiencing. So, in closing, what we are witnessing today is far more than expansion of military cooperation. No? It is the construction of an integrated military economic architecture across East and Southeast Asia designed to preserve U.S. global dominance amid the rise of China. No? The military bases, the defense agreements, critical minerals, infrastructure corridors, artificial intelligence, semiconductor supply chains, industrial zones. All these are interconnected. All these serve the same strategic objective of U.S. imperialism. And for the Philippines, this means increasing integration, no, into the first island chain strategy, no, of the U.S. And therefore, we are exposed to even deeper military dependence, and we are more vulnerable, not to regional wars. We are vulnerable to being dragged into wars that are not of our own making. So the challenge before us is therefore larger than opposing individual military bases, no, or individual investment projects. It should be about asserting our genuine national sovereignty. No, it is about ensuring that the country's resources, industries, infrastructure, and foreign policy serve the Filipino people, no, rather than the strategic competition of rival imperialist powers. Only by rejecting foreign domination, resisting imperialist plunder, and pursuing an independent path, pursuing what we call independent foreign policy, no, can the peoples of the Philippines, of East and Southeast Asia hope to build a region founded not on military confrontation, but on genuine cooperation, no, social justice, and lasting peace. So I end my presentation there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arnold. Thank you for the detailed information on what is happening in the Philippines, but also contexting the inter-imperialist competition between China and the US and how that competition is leading to more and more intense militarization across the world, of course, but we in the Asia and the Pacific are feeling it intensely. The Pax Silica and its connection to the economic security zone, I think is, as you said, is unique. And in many ways, it is a direct competition with China, as China has been doing those kinds of projects all over the world, especially as a Pakistani, I can speak on the CPEC and the kind of connections that have been made with respect to railway lines, with respect to motorways, highways, and also maritime trade routes. So indeed, the context of the first island chain strategy is very, very critical for the countries which are in that chain. And as you said, Arnold, the people of the Philippines need to intensify. They have been resisting, but the question arises: who is it all this for? Is it for the Americans? Is it like in the case of Pakistan? Is it for the Chinese? And where are the people, and how are they suffering? So thank you once again for your intervention. And now we will turn to the situation in Iran, as it has resisted and defeated the all-out imperialist aggressions in the U.S. Zionist wars launched in late February. I think many of you will also know that today is also the funeral of the late Khamenei, who was martyred on 28 February itself. So I will now welcome Hamid Sharabi from Iran, and we would like to hear what is the current situation in Iran at this point. Thank you, friends.
Hello, comrades. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to address this important webinar, which is being held by ILPS, International League of People's Struggle, as the organizer on a very special day, which is the 4th of July, the so-called the Day of Independence of the United States. Well, I'm sure that other speakers in this panel, in this webinar, will talk about what has happened during these last 150 years since that declaration was signed. And I'm sure that Mr. Trump will speak, he will talk a long speech, bragging about his achievements, how he was able to massacre tens of thousands of innocent children, women, and men in Gaza. He would brag about how he kidnapped the president of an independent nation in Venezuela. He will brag about how he killed our supreme leader, all our major commanders of our people's army. Only in one incident, 168 innocent child in Minaf. So I'm not sure if he's going to mention even like the 400 military interventions that has occurred during this 250 years, or talk about tens of military coup d'etats organized by the United States, or talk about torture of tens of thousands of freedom fighters. And you can add to that list the very shameful record of the United States imperialist government during the last 250 years. But what Mr. Trump is going to talk about is nothing new. This is just, bragging about unreal or phony achievements. But then again, at this time, at this very moment, we are having a quite important event taking place in the world, which is the mobilization of the masses in Iran and beyond the borders of Iran, in tribute to Sayyid Ali Khamenei, the martyred supreme leader of Iran. In a couple of days from today there will be mass demonstrations. Yesterday it was, the day after, but on Monday you will see the ocean of resistance. You will see the resistance by tens of millions of people gathered in every city and village of Iran to pay respect to a courageous man, to a man who showed the humanity, the whole humanity, how to confront the aggressions of the imperialist powers of the United States empire. You all know, a few days before he was murdered, Mr. Trump and other members of the ruling class of the United States, they openly threatened him that they will kill our leader, kill him and other leaders of our country. And his response was very simple: the Iranian people shall not surrender. And this message has been well received by the Iranian people, has been well received by all the freedom fighters throughout the world. And allow me to conclude my short message by saying that we want the murderers to be accountable for what they did. We want Mr. Trump to be accountable for the order of our supreme leader. We want him to be punished. Him and all those who carried this genocide, the cruel event, this cowardly event, massacring our supreme leader. So please, I would ask the organizers of the meeting to announce and make it available a statement that was is going to be published today, but I make sure that it is available for the organizers of the meeting to announce it in your meeting. It's a tribute, it's a letter mentioning who was Sayyid Ali Khamenei, what he did, and what is the perspective after his martyrdom. And I urge you to sign it. I urge you to pass it to your colleagues, your friends everywhere. And my last word is a word with a special group of people, a very special group of people. And that is because I mentioned about the ruling class of the United States, but there is another force in the United States, and that is the working class of the United States. I deeply believe that the salvation of humanity actually stays at the hand of the American working class. So we urge the American working class to come to the support of the liberation movement, to come to the support of the Iranian people, to ask the government of the United States to stop threatening us, to stop its war against us, and to keep the promises that it has given throughout the negotiation, which is pulling out the United States military forces from our region. And this is very important, stopping all the military aggressions, not only in Iran, but also in other fronts of the resistance movement in the West Asia.
Thank you, Mr. Sharabi, for your even willing to speak to us from Iran, given that there is a funeral being held today. I know that many dignitaries and millions of people, as he said, are on the streets. And I think the most important message that he gave us was, he said, I believe that the working class of the US is the only one capable of holding them accountable. And we, in the International League of People's Struggle and the struggles across the world, we believe that it is, of course, the working class of the entire world, which is the only force which is capable of bringing down and smashing imperialism, especially US imperialism, all imperialisms, to end as Tino had said earlier, the 250 years of plunder, of exploitation, of constant sucking people's blood, of the millions of slaves which were transported from Africa to the US and Canada, to either other parts of the world, to what is happening right now under the umbrella of imperialism, whether it is Palestine, the genocide continues. I have been visiting many of the critical mineral sites that are being excavated in Pakistan currently, and the situation of the people is just miserable. They are literally just taking away our resources, as was pointed out by Arnold. And that is their intention everywhere. We know that. So thank you so much for putting the trust in the working people. And that, of course, is what we all not only believe in, we also act upon it. With that, let me welcome Amin Arar. Thank you, Amin, for being here. And Amin Arar is from the Jordanian Democratic Popular Unity Party, and he will be sharing the struggles of the Palestinian people and those across West Asia as part of the axis of resistance. So welcome, comrade. The floor is yours.
Dear comrades and friends, on behalf of the Popular Unity Party, we express our gratitude for this invitation and for raising important issues on the global stage, especially in our turbulent region, West Asia. Thank you, ILPS. Revolutionary greetings, salute to the souls of the martyrs of the resistance in Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Iran, and all martyrs who have contributed in resisting the Zionist project from Latin America to East Asia. Salutation to our steadfast and patient Palestinian people who reject all attempts at displacement. Despite all this aggression and the various methods of settlement and ethnic cleansing, this colonial expansion, spanning nearly a century, has deepened the consciousness of the Palestinian people and the vanguard of the resistance, giving rise to all a national program of struggle that quickly transformed into a sweeping giving rise to the national program of struggle that quickly transformed into a sweeping Palestinian popular movement, whose repercussions extend to the people of our Arab and Islamic nations and to liberation movements around the world. Salute to all resistance fighters and to everyone who says no to the Zionist imperialist alliance. As a result of Zionist aggression and the occupation of nearly 1/3 of Lebanese territory in 1982, the Lebanese National Resistance Front was launched, followed by the Islamic resistance in Lebanon. Despite the ups and downs, advance and stickbacks in the Palestinian resistance project over the past decades, and despite the immense and the colossal sacrifice, the steadfastness in the face of the ongoing genocide. Actually, it's not only genocide, it's ecocide, it's culture side, it's terrible issues. Ongoing genocide since the Nakba. The continuation of the resistance and the rejection of displacement schemes have transformed the idea of resistance and culture of resistance into a resistance project with its pillars, components, and currents, all of which are united in their resistance to Zionism, American imperialism, and all who side with them. Actually, after October 7th, we are now faced with new Arab components, engagement, and resistance. the Zionist American project in Yemen and Iraq. The resistance, with its multiple and widespread components, has succeeded in imposing a new equations and rules of engagement, with Al-Aqsa flood as its main catalyst. Although the epic of the flood is a milestone in the history of prolonged struggle and resistance against the Zionist colonial project. Its uniqueness lays in the fact that its impact and effect transcended the geographical borders of Gaza and Palestine to reach the region, the wider area, and the world. The sacrifice and blood of more than a quarter of a million Palestinians among martyrs, wounded, missing, and prisoners over the course of 2.5 years. And despite the ongoing genocide, we have the driving force behind a historical turning point. This has corrected the level of awareness regarding the reality of the conflict and its historical roots, and has restored matters to their proper place, that the Palestinian people's struggle is a legitimate and just national liberation struggle to rid themselves of the most heinous settler colonial project in human history, the Zionist occupation project. The scope and reach of the state of resistance, its culture, and diversity of its form and structure have expanded to become Arab Islamic International, forging its path in this historical phase. And it has succeeded in stopping the Zionist American New Middle East project train. The most prominent headings of the transformation, the shift in Zionist security doctrine from the preemptive lightning-fast war outside the geography occupied by the entity to war that has not relinquished its preemptive character, but has transformed into a long war and an existential war. Zionism as a colonial tool and partner. We are talking about the Zionism and its project embodied a colonial, occupying, and settler colonial reality, which involved from the utilitarian tool serving British and later American colonial ambitions into a partner in interest and in building the capabilities of brutal hegemony and genocide. Specialized in repression and surveillance within the capitalist division of labor, Zionism and Zionist entity have specialized in developing techniques in espionage, surveillance, repression, and genocide against peoples and human groups, not only in Palestine, but also in countries geographical far from Palestine, like in Iran and Yemen, and actually Lebanon is near Palestine. Escalation to genocide. The Zionist entity has transformed into a state that embodies the highest degree of fascism and insistence of war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and genocide in its various forms. Demographic genocide, the annihilation of consciousness, and the right of return. The right of return actually for the refugees, Palestinian refugees. And the annihilation of Palestinian identity and symbolism. The current landscape now, these days, we are witnessing the prelude to final battles from hegemony of the unipolar system. We are confident that the coming era will clearly reveal and outcomes of the new regional and international equations, rules, and alignments. In the light of the major new developments, the opportunity is available to halt the overthrow the project of new colonial hegemony over our Arab homeland and to move toward achieving sovereignty over our capabilities free from Zionist American colonial hegemony. We are facing a new equations and rules of engagement that did not exist before June 2025, including transition of strategic patience to strategic parity, the settling of Abrahamic peace project, the emergence of the Strait of Hormuz as a key factor, and growing rifts within the US-Europe front and within US society itself. The US withdrawal from region has become more visible and it's consistent with the new US national security strategy. We are witnessing disintegration and conflicts within the entity, signaling the dead end from the Zionist project by all measures. The continuation of genocide in Gaza and centrality of the Palestinian cause with the continuation of Zionist aggression against our Lebanese Arab people. The path to the US Zionist Middle East project has been closed. This US Zionist Middle East project has been closed, and it has paved the way for the possibility of ridding ourselves of Zionist American hegemony and open broad horizons for a new chapter of equal and just cooperation between the countries of the Arab region with Iran, Turkey, and Pakistan. Regarding the Washington Framework Agreement, we condemn, this is between actually US, the Zionism entity and the Lebanese government. We condemn the signing of the representatives of the Lebanese government in Washington of this agreement of surrender and submission, which fulfills the conditions of the Zionism enemy and violates the sovereignty of the Lebanese state. The submissive agreement grants this criminal entity a certificate of innocence of all genocidal massacres it has committed. At a time when the Lebanese government is declaring its humiliating submission to the Zionist enemy, we salute the heroic Lebanese resistance fighter who humiliated the Zionist enemy and demonstrated its importance of the battlefield on the battlefield. We are fully confident that the Lebanese resistance is capable of bringing down any similar agreement for engaging with the enemy and resisting it, not submitting of its dictates is the path of protecting Lebanon's land and sovereignty. The war is not over, and neither the United States nor the Zionism entity has surrendered or will surrender. The conflict continues. It has become visible to proceed with the forming a new region economic and security system based on cooperation among Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, free from American Zionism hegemony. We are facing a new Eastern Mediterranean, West Asia, and North Africa, but outside of Zionist American hegemony. Long life international solidarity, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Amin. Thank you for your detailed input into especially the Lebanese, the really terrible Lebanese agreement with the Zionists, and also the faith that we all have that the war is not over. None of the parties have surrendered, and they will not surrender. And you did not mention it, but the damage to the US bases and the weakening of the US hold inside the Middle East is now very evident. And of course, that paves the way for a new era of where the new era where West Asia would be free of the US Zionist hegemony that they have controlled over the region. You have faith in the alliance between Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey, Iran, and of course, we, the people of these countries, should be the one to make sure that our states who are now really standing up with Iran and fighting back US imperialism, that our people also maintain that spirit of resistance to US imperialism, to all forms of imperialism that are rampant. And thank you for reminding us that Palestine is still under a genocide. The condition of the political prisoners is tremendously terrible, and it's something that I think needs to be propagated more. The Zionist entity has done everything it can to as you said, to carry out ethnic cleansing, to make sure that the Palestinian identity is wiped off. And as we all know, that has not been possible. The Palestinian people have remained steadfast, have remained courageous in spite of the ecocide, the genocide, the starvation, the humiliation, and all forms of various agreements that the Trump agreement has been trying to push forth. But as you said, and we fully agree, and we fully believe that our resistance forces will be able to push back and be able to actually maintain control over our lands. With that, let me thank you and now welcome. Actually, just give me a second. Sorry, the situation here is really quite bad. Okay, the next speaker was supposed to be Naik, Monica Flores, who have elaborated on the blue economy. That is also a very, it's a terrible neoliberal scheme, but it is also a military scheme, which the imperialists, especially the US, has been peddling in the Pacific. But there is a super typhoon in that region, and it has just landed on Guam, where Nyack is situated. There is no steady internet connection there due to ongoing power fluctuations. It would seem like it's also happening in Pakistan, as there is no real connection here. So Nyack sends her regrets and has requested us to share this message with you. Guam is a US colony that is being built up for war and constant war games, and at the same time facing the consequences of climate crisis directly related to the war machine. So next we will be moving in, please keep her in your thoughts. We hope that all of them, all the people on the island stay safe. And we will now move to the question answer section of the program. And we will be opening the floor for our participants to ask questions to our speakers. As was said earlier, please put your questions directly to either in the question and answer box or raise your hand to be unmuted to ask your question. And I will remind everybody, please keep your questions brief due to the amount of speakers and the limited time that we have left in the program. So if there are any questions, the floor is open for questions now. I believe there is a question in the chat, but since my computer kept going in and out, can we just ask one of my colleagues to just raise that question? I cannot see the question.
Yeah, I can read the question real quick. It was to Tina, who answered this over chat, but also if Tina was able to yeah, let the floor know as well, the response. But the question was something was said about economic crisis in the US, but if you look at the data, the US GDP has increased every year except for 2019 to 2020. So what are the parameters used to say that there is an economic crisis? Tino, if you want to take the floor to answer it as well here.
Sure. Briefly, I just responded briefly that while there has been GDP growth in the US each year since 2020, it's at a much slower rate than the rate of the growing debt of the United States. So it's going to surpass $40 trillion of the US debt. So while there is some growth, the debt currently is about 120% of the GDP last year. So the increasing debt, the inability of the rate of growth to match the spending of the US will put it further into debt and increase even the global debt crisis, which is why the US is trying to continue to seek more profits abroad and in the US by cutting back on programs and services and seeking super profits in other of its neo colonies and other parts of the world. So the crisis continues and intensifies as well, even with increasing GDP growth. Others can also add.
Thanks, Dino. Arnold or anybody would like to maybe provide some more?
Well, yeah, no, just to add some points, no, that aside from what Tino has already mentioned, no, if you're going to compare the long-term trajectory, no, of the GDP growth of the US, it has really slowed down, no, dramatically. It has never really fully recovered, no, since the 2008 crisis, and much of the uh of course, there was the pandemic, so there was the base effect, no? So that also affected the growth in the GDP. But overall, as I have mentioned, compared to previous decades, no, in terms of averages, it is actually much slower in terms of the overall trajectory. And much of the growth, no, as Tino already mentioned, is driven by fiscal spending, no, of the U.S. government in an attempt to address the crisis at the expense, of course, of the American people.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else would like to just chip in a bit? Okay, thank you. Any other questions that we have from our friends, our participants here? Please do help me out if there are questions, since I can't see. So if no more questions, maybe we could just summarize, and at the end, we also have some announcements. But in summary, and it says my internet is unstable, so I hope I can finish. In summary, I think as we celebrate the 250 years of resistance against US imperialism, that has impacted especially the entire region of Asia Pacific, from West Asia, the ongoing wars, the ongoing treacherous agreements that they make, from the Abraham Accords to the new Lebanese agreement, to the Pax Silica, to the minerals conference that was held in the US, which also had another engagement called Forge. I forget the name now, but it's all about minerals. I think today our speakers highlighted the fascism that is now rampant, especially inside the United States. We who live outside in the southern countries are more used to fascism, but what is very stark now that under the Trump administration, the conditions of the migrants, what is happening to the minorities, the dissolution of all forms of the safeguards that people had, the rights that they had for freedom of expression, to speak out, to protect the environment, has all been basically now washed out. They have now some of the biggest number of detainees in the world. I think more than 500,000 people have already been sent out of the country. Children are appearing in courtrooms and have no adults to speak for them. The condition of workers was detailed, and then just now, the economic condition, the misery of the workers, the taking away of the social securities that people had previously, the health centers, the food stamps, all of that has now been, it's consistently being trampled down upon. And then there's an increase in the militarized offensive against the people. So that's what is happening in the US. And as Mr. Sharabi mentioned, that of course the working class has fought back. Tino gave many examples in context to the workers' struggles, in context to the militarization struggles, in context to the standing up for the migrants and standing up for the rights of the migrants. So all of that, of course, is happening not only in the US, across the Asia Pacific, across Latin America, with the kidnapping of the president, Maduro. There were weeks of campaigns standing up for not only Venezuela, but also the starvation that is being enforced on Cuba right now. Going from Tino to Arnold, I think what Arnold said, in essence, also portrays the condition of many of our countries in West Asia, in South Asia, and Southeast Asia. But Pax Salica is almost now becoming a kind of a, it's becoming a template for what the US intends to do in the coming years. Its fight against against Chinese competition is now taking many different forms of heightened military bases, from 5 to 9 military bases in the Philippines, the increased number of so-called economic agreements between US and Japan, which are in essence, we all know they are not really economic agreements. Behind the economic agreements are the military agreements, which will, whether it is railway lines, whether it is getting out the rare earth metals, which are critical for making weapons, all of that is to enhance the military capabilities of the US so that it can maintain its hegemony over our regions and over the globe in general. But we were reminded again that Iran has stood up against that onslaught, and the martyrdom of the 168 children in Menab, the martyrdom of the supreme leader of Iran, all of that is a symbol of the resistance of the people and what people can do if they are united to stand up against militarism. From 48, since Palestine was battered and the creation of the Zionist state of Israel, people have never given up on the state of Palestine. And the past 3 years, from 2023 of the attack from Hamas, the Al-Aqsa floods, to this day, even across extreme atrocity, the people have stood up in West Asia, across the world. It's sometimes one wonders how the Palestinian people have not given up, have not surrendered, but they have not. So I will leave us with those words, with that hope, with that militant feeling, the militant sense of fighting for our rights, fighting for our land, fighting for our livelihood, for our food, everything is at stake right now. But none of the speakers by any means were at all pessimistic. And that is, of course, what we believe in. Resistance, and the resistance, the collective unity of the people across North and South is what is going to win this long hegemony of the past 250 years. It is not over, but it is teetering, and we will not let them continue into the next decade, hopefully. Certainly, we are there, and we will fight till they are demolished. So with that, I will give it over to my comrades in ILPS to make the announcement, since I've really lost much of the stuff that I had written down. So if you don't mind, Ritik, would you be able to take on from here? Thank you, friends.
Yes. Thank you, Azra, for such a agitating closing. So we will also be, of course, continuing our efforts as the League, because in the face of the intensifying imperialist aggression and plunder, we must intensify our struggle and our efforts to unite our struggles by building the broad anti-imperialist united front. Anti-imperialist front and movement against the common enemy of the people of the world, and that is against U.S. imperialism. So we must continue to build the ILPS and make it truly a force to be reckoned with, to wield the broad anti-imperialist and democratic unity within the world and across the world, and ultimately advance our struggle towards socialism. So currently we have the ILPS at 25 campaign to honor the legacy of the League in building this people's unity over the last 25 years. And in doing so, we must remember that this unity is based on generating genuine solidarity and support for our people's struggles. So, in the spirit of ILPS at 25, we have also launched the Free the Migrants, All Workers Unite campaign alongside the International Migrants Alliance, International Women's Alliance, and Migrante International to contribute to overcoming the neoliberal attacks of monopoly capitalists to weaken and divide workers' movements. So they have abused migrant workers as an underclass of the working class in various countries across the world by systematizing discrimination against them and depriving them of the same rights and wages as local workers, which works to drive down the wages of all workers. The monopoly capitalists pit migrant and local workers against each other by using divide and conquer tactics as xenophobia in order to divert their anger away from the imperialists as the true perpetrators of extreme exploitation they both suffer. So that's why it's important that we build genuine solidarity between migrant workers and local workers so they can unite together to struggle for their common liberation as the working class. So with all that said, please join us for our next webinar in this series, where we'll cover U.S. imperialist aggression and plunder throughout the world in 2 weeks from now on July 18th, with promotional materials that will be released soon. We will focus on Latin America and the Caribbean, especially due to the U.S.'s current focus, as kind of discussed here today, on carving out the entire Western Hemisphere in its so-called Trump corollary, which we have seen with the invasion of Venezuela and the puppet governments arising within the region. We want to emphasize that we stand in solidarity with the people of Venezuela amidst this time of disaster from the recent earthquakes, and we encourage everyone here and our members to raise solidarity and aid in this trying time. So with that, that wraps up our webinar for today. Thank you everyone for attending. We hope to see you in the future and to continue the struggle against imperialism and all reaction alongside the League as we have been doing for the past 25 years. Long live international solidarity. Thank you, everyone.